All right, hello. Welcome to Deeper Than Dogma tonight. Tonight, the topic is atheism a depressing philosophy? Um, Now, when I put these titles out there, I always kind of like take into consideration who we're going to have on the panel, um, what we're going to be talking about, and I phrase it in kind of a question for the panel from people from a opposite viewpoint. Um, in the case of this spun off from a conversation that the Holy Spackle Deidre had with Befuddled in a hangout a couple weeks ago that I wanted to tackle. And in that, the Holy Spackle, or Deidre, I'm just going to call you Deidre, sorry, had said that there were certain things about atheism that she found unbearable. That the idea of without no cosmic justice, or I think something along that line. And it was an interesting thing because when you talk to a lot of people that are ex-Christians, one of the huge things that they have a problem with off the start is this realization that when you sometimes adopt an atheist viewpoint, that there are certain things that just kind of get weeded out. The idea of cosmic justice or a divine purpose. And these things can be very scary concepts, first off. And so when I was looking into some of the information from this, I found a lot of pages a lot of sites, a lot of blogs that refer to atheism as a very depressing, very empty philosophical position. Now, that's why I phrase it that way. I phrase it in the form of, an unbeliever, or sorry, a believer asking an unbeliever or non-believer about why they accept atheism, and because of that, I've phrased it like is atheism a depressing philosophy? Now, I think we've probably covered this before, and I think that nobody in this hangout actually agrees that atheism is in itself a philosophy. That atheism is just the rejection of the claim put forward by theists. The fact that you adopt the position of atheism doesn't mean that there are all this other philosophical baggage that you necessarily need to take on with it. You don't you could be an atheist and still believe in concepts like karma for cosmic justice, or you can still believe in a lot of things. So to just address that first point, the point of contention that a lot of people have with just the way that I phrase this title is I did phrase it in the way of asking the panel about the atheistic philosophy. I don't believe that atheism is a philosophy, and if anybody actually wants to go down that route, we can maybe attack it a little bit here. But the main point is someone who's an atheist, someone that does reject the idea of a divine purpose for everything, someone that does reject the idea of this cosmic justice, or people that are satisfied with answers about origins being simply I don't know. Is that really that much more of a depressing mindset than religion that says that it has these answers? So we're going to kind of hash that out tonight. We're going to talk about that on our panel tonight. I'm really happy to have Befuddled and Deidre in here to continue this conversation with us, as well as Benny Ocean, Dragnot, Floyd, Helena Handbasket, Ozymandias Ramses, Xbox Fiend, and myself. So to start off, maybe we can kind of go back to the conversation that Deidre and Befuddled had there. And you'd raised some objections there, Deidre, just about these certain ideas within atheism that you find scary or unbearable, I think was the term you used. Could you maybe go into that again?
Yeah, unbearable would be the word that I would use. So we understand that there's a lot of suffering in the world, and we can argue about whether the world is getting better or whether the world's getting worse. And I don't really want to get into that argument, but I would say that there's still a lot of suffering in the world. And one thing, I mean, I would cite right now is that picture of the little boy washed up on shore, and I mean, I just welled up inside. And I think most of us, whether we're atheists or Christians, most of us that have compassion, and we feel for people like that, people that are suffering, and I know that there's this criticism that sometimes Christians don't we don't care about this life and we care about the next, but I actually think there's a lot of Christians that do care about this life, and the problem is we just can't save or reach everybody, and that there's just so much horrific injustice in the world that to say that there is no God is unbearable, because there would never be a final justice. There would never be any reconciliation. It's just, sorry, that's the life you got. It sucks. Have a nice day.
Now, B, you had brought up some points that in your conversion process or deconversion process, that this was something that was very hard for you to begin with. And I'd like you to go into that more, but also for the people on the panel that are former Christians as well, I'd also like to hear your input on this. What was that transformation like to, this shift in your viewpoints about these topics?
Yeah, I mean, what did you want me to go first?
No, go ahead, B.
Okay. Well, when she asked the question, I mean, I know Deidre well enough that I know it wasn't like a trap kind of thing, and we have a pretty good ability to, go back and forth. So I was pretty honest about the fact that that was and still is something that I struggle with. It's like the idea that you become an atheist and you have everything figured out. That I wish that was how it was, at least not for me. But I think because I was raised I was a Christian for 30-something years, and I was raised in the church. I never was familiar with or presented with a worldview that had any option other than there is a God, and that eventually, after all this is done, you get to see everybody again, and everything, all the wrongs are righted and all that. So it was very scary for me to come to a place where that you don't get to put that at the end of all this stuff and think like, well, even if this is really crappy right now, God will make it all right somehow, some way in eternity. That's not something easy. I don't think that's easy for anybody to deal with, especially if you've gone most of your life or a lot of your life having that thing that you use to make yourself feel better about situations. The fact that, a child gets cancer and dies early. Well, you can tell yourself, at least they're in heaven with so-and-so now, and they will get to live out their life. And then coming to the realization that maybe there is some people that are born and live and die in horrific situations, and they don't really have much joy at all. That's hard to swallow. It's not like it's something that atheists are like, oh, see ya, sorry, bad luck to you. No, I think it almost, for me, it makes it more of a realization that that you need to do something about people that live in those situations, because you can't pass it off as, well, at least they'll get some kind of justice or whatever in some other life. So it is something that is hard for me to handle, but I guess I couldn't look at it. It is still something that I struggle with trying to reconcile, but it's kind of like if there isn't anything else out there, I'm not going to believe something just because it makes me feel better. So that's kind of the place that I came to. That wasn't a reason for or against converting or whatever. It just was kind of like a byproduct of, now I have to deal with this realization that I can't make myself feel better about certain things. So
well, what brings along that you think that you're owed some kind of a justice, some kind of a fairness in this life? What?
Are you asking me or Deidre?
Anybody on the panel.
I think how do we, I don't know if we feel like we're owed. It's just hard to, the idea of justice, holding people accountable for the things that they do. Even certain situations that happen in my life, when I think about the fact that people that did certain things to me, they will never be held accountable at all. That's hard to let go of. So I think having an idea that, well, even if we don't get them in this life, God will get them somewhere, that makes you feel better about it, maybe.
Is that not just some kind of an emotional attachment or revenge or oven?
Well, I think it was for me. I don't know. I can only speak for myself.
Well,
yeah.
Rainbow actually in the comment section put it out in kind of the same way that X was talking about here, is that that's eternal justice isn't justice; it's just retribution.
Yeah, revenge. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That depends on your theology, right? So there is theology that does view it as retribution, and there's other theology that doesn't. So I think that would depend on which theology you're using.
Can I say one little thing about Rainbow's comment?
No.
Is that, thanks Xbox, I miss you too. So anyway, Yeah, I think that if you're comparing atheism as a philosophy or a way of seeing the world compared to Christianity, the traditional way we're used to thinking of Christianity, where most people go to hell and the other people go to heaven. I've never gotten an exact number, but they say the way is narrow and path is. I haven't been in a hangout for a while, so I'm rusty at talking.
The path is wide to destruction, and the way to the truth is narrow.
Most of the Christians I know would tell you that most people are going to hell. That maybe if there's 7 billion people alive right now, 90% of them will be in hell at least, not counting whatever people in the past. So if you have some version of the world where 90%, let's just say 90% people are suffering for eternity, once all is said and done, 90% of humans will go on to suffer forever, and then the other 10 will be rewarded. That's a horrible vision of the world, unless you just say you don't care about those people. You just don't care about the people who are suffering. You can say they deserve it for whatever reason. They deserve to suffer forever. I think annihilation, the idea that when it's over, is merciful and kind by comparison. Anything would be kind compared with most of humanity suffering forever. So
I think that what you're saying, I think sometimes from a non-believer's point of view, when I look at the concept of hell and eternal conscious torment, which is the way that I grew up believing that was how it went, and it's easy to look at that and be like, how could you be okay with that? And then also kind of make a jump to say, if you really think that that's what happens, you must be a kind of cold-hearted person. But I don't know that I can necessarily go there. I think that what happens is there's at least for me, there was like a disconnect. Like, it's like, yeah, I know that really what happened, or what I thought really happened, was that people went to hell and then they would be there forever, but I didn't think about it much past that. And I don't know if that was a defense mechanism, so that I didn't think about it too much because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. But I think sometimes we cause rifts between theist and atheist groups when we say, well, if you really believe that all these people are going to hell, then you're a horrible person. Not that this is what you were saying, Ben, but that you're a horrible person if you could really believe that. And it's kind of like, I don't know that sometimes people go all the way into really go through what that would mean and the implications of that. I guess because I think that there's a lot of people that aren't, or you know what I mean, that it just maybe doesn't go that far as they think about it that much, because for whatever reason.
I think we totally think about it. I've had a lot of conversations with people about eternal conscious torment, and some of them think that it sort of fades away, or some people have these traditional Dante's Inferno views, and there's levels and a sort of torture. Other people think that it's just the sheer separation and the great loneliness with God, without God. Other people think, that there's universalists in a different style than what you would imagine, where there's a refining fire that you go through, and that hell is locked on the inside, and that maybe you would potentially be able to accept God in the afterlife. And they're probably the smallest percentage in Christianity. I'm an annihilationist, where I think I lean towards that there's a conditional soul.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that
afterlife?
Sorry. Do you think that you're of the majority of the people that actually do think through it in detail? Or because, I mean, I'll admit that I was the type of Christian that didn't even really think about it that much. It was like, oh yeah, they're going to hell, but I'm not. But I need to make sure that I try to save as many people as possible. That's as deep as it went for me. Yeah, so sometimes I think we assume that everybody else has thought about it. What was that?
Do you think egocentrism kind of plays into this? Your worries are more centered around you. Yes, you care about these others, but you're more worried about you and what's going on with you, overwhelming what's going on with these other things.
I think the fact that you're saved and you're special is part of the appeal. Mm-hmm. You have all these. Most people aren't going to make it, but you will. You're going to be all right. Right. If it was just for everyone, for some people they just feel like, what do you mean? Of course, Godwin's law, right? They got to go to Hitler. You mean Hitler's not going to burn? Hitler's got to burn. Right. Right. And so some people can't envision a form of justice, cosmic justice or karma or whatever, that doesn't include some sort of awful punishment for terrible people like Hitler.
Hitler is the guy that cut me off in traffic this morning.
Him too.
But even that, like when you think about it, I was thinking about this the other day, is like when you think about it, I think, okay, maybe if you took every single person that died as a result of Hitler's actions and maybe give them like 100 years of torture, eventually it would run out. But would there be a point where we would say, okay, maybe even he's kind of paid for the fact that he was this horrible person? Most people go to Hitler as like the worst possible person they can think of. I don't know that I would even say that Hitler would deserve eternal conscious torment.
I would agree with you.
Well, I'm a bleeding heart. Like people are telling me they're going through the list of you guys, the list of atheists and anti-theists and stuff. Would you send so and so to hell? And an off-air hangout. And I'm like, I wouldn't send anybody to hell. Like I if it was up to me, and I, well, I don't take eternal conscious torment. That position. I mean, I can't deny that 80% of Christianity does, and there's always that nagging feeling like, what if this is true, you know? So yeah, I find the idea of hell extremely depressing because, well, my brother's an atheist. I think of the people that I love that aren't believers, the people I've met that are Buddhists, you know? And I have a deep sense of grief, even with annihilationists. So there is that dark side, I guess, and I could admit to that. But at the same time, just like you said, oh, one life to live, YOLO. You know, as an atheist, you know, better make it count. You know, and care about people and stuff like that. I feel like I'm held accountable for what I do in this world, and one thing is, if I withhold compassion, if I withhold love, I think God's going to hold me accountable to that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
We've inadvertently been sort of talking about Christian theism and visions of hell and stuff like that. We're supposed to be talking about you know, is atheism unbearable and is it depressing? Yes. And so the question as I see it is, when one thinks through the implications of atheism, right, should one be depressed about it? Should one feel demoralized and discouraged and despondent? Right? Well, of course, that depends on what you think is implied by atheism. And as I see it, atheism isn't a philosophy. Atheism is one philosophical proposition. It's the proposition that there are no gods, or that there are no certain gods. You can be atheist with respect to certain conceptions of God and agnostic with respect to others. But I mean, obviously, it doesn't follow that because you posit that there exist no gods, that it doesn't follow that you're positing that there exists no justice, that there exists no meaning, no significance, no purpose, no value in living. So all of this, whether you answer negatively to those questions, if you say no, there's no value, meaning, purpose, significance to life, that all hinges, I think, on other philosophical commitments, things that having to do with, for instance, philosophical naturalism and materialism and things like that. Moral anti-realism, you know, that sort of stuff. If you're an atheist because you're committed to those other things, which I think is how it usually goes. Most people, I don't think, they're not atheists, and then that determines everything else. I think most people sort of have a view of life and a view of morality and an idea of certain values and a sense of what life is all about. And that leads them to either theism or atheism or agnosticism. I think it usually works the other way around. I think it's our other philosophical commitments. They can even be implicit. They typically are implicit. That lead us to be atheists. Those of us who are atheists. So I think it's everything else that decides, that should determine whether or not we should despair. But I don't think atheism per se, atheism in and of itself, is discouraging or unbearable or demoralizing or anything of the sort.
I think it's just that people kind of have this inclination to assume that your personal, religious or anti-religious affiliation means that you will take on certain other beliefs wholesale. I mean, for Christianity, I think by necessity you have to, in order to be a good Christian. But in the I'm sorry, I lost my thought. Go ahead, Ozzy.
Yeah, I think Ozzy wanted to get to that question.
Yeah, I was sort of building a ramp as I do to get to a certain question for Deidre. So, do you see it as I see it, as I described it there? That do you think atheism itself is discouraging and demoralizing and unbearable and scary or unpalatable? Or is it the other things that you think are concomitant or attendant upon atheism usually?
A little bit of both, right?
Okay.
So atheism itself separate. Why do I think it's unbearable? Is with atheism there is no source, there is no giver of a capacity. There's nowhere to sort of aim your life or a trajectory point that to me seems meaningful across the ages, meaningful in a long term sense, unless you win the lottery maybe and you happen to be a famous person, you know. But the average people, they vanish and die. Nobody hears from them ever again. They just dust to dust, boom, you know. With a lack of a God, you no longer have a source for morality necessarily. You have an internal source perhaps, but not an outer source. And then with the lack of God, you don't have cosmic justice. I would say purpose changes and shifts with the philosophy that you adopt as an atheist. So you could adopt secular humanism, and I think you could find purpose and meaning in that. You could adopt, I don't know, secular humanism is probably the best one out of the bunch that I've seen, but you can adopt different philosophies, combine it with your atheism. Some of them are, I can jive with a secular humanist usually. Some of them I can jive with, and some of them I bulk at, like nihilism, you know, and I just reject it immediately. So
Have some of these external sources though that don't include a God for morality and for things like that and for purpose, that don't necessarily include a God. I don't think they have to be internal. They can be external as well.
I mean, in like altruism, I guess, external for the community, but you're still looking at humanity, you know. Like name an external source for something like morality, or an external source for purpose.
Well, what do you mean by external? I mean,
The form I take are the natural law, the principles of logic.
Right.
As a
Can I answer something really quick that kind of goes along with what Ozzy was asking?
Yeah.
Maybe what makes sense to me is the fact that, and I'm not speaking for Dieter, but for myself, that it's like the reason that I had such a hard time, and I still have a hard time a lot of time, like because of if you grew up indoctrinated or whatever you want to call it, with certain ideas that it's hard to then shift away from those, even though you maybe intellectually know that they're not, or don't believe them anymore. Emotionally, there's a connection to them, like the idea that it's okay to not have some purpose that has to reach into eternity, right? The idea that maybe, okay, if there's no God and what we do here doesn't have this eternal purpose or eternal significance, it still a lot of times for me feels like it's not quite as good as what I had maybe when I was a Christian. Like I had this idea that everything I do here echoes in eternity, blah, blah, blah. Well, if I don't have that, so a lot of times the things that you come up with don't feel as good as, and I know that that's just because of the way I was raised, was told over and over and over that you had to have, that everything you did had to have this kind of significance. So I think sometimes you're fighting against that when you're, especially for people that have believed a certain way for a long time. It may be that's why you have to have something that's like outside of you and that creates this meaning that has a level of significance, if that makes sense. That was what it was for me.
I think that's the question that we're trying to ask here, and I mean this is why I want to go back to all the people. Sorry, one second. Okay, sorry. I don't know where your crossbow is. Go. Okay.
Crossbow.
How many times have you been asked that during a hangout?
I don't
Probably just once.
Sorry.
He has Daryl Dixon in his house.
Sorry about that. No. I think that's what we're trying to get at here is B, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about now this is that when you moved to becoming an atheist, that you did find things more depressing, that there was
I don't know if you'd say more depressing. It's like I had certain ways to deal with certain situations, like stressful situations, things when I was like, everybody goes through stress and worry and times that they don't know exactly how things are going to work out. And from the time that I was a child, I was taught then you default back to God's going to take care of it. It's like this way to kind of put off really worrying about it too much, because you put it onto God. So then when I took that away, I felt like, well, how do I fix this? So I had to find things to plug in there. And in the beginning, it didn't work at all. And I felt like this doesn't, but I had a conflict because intellectually I didn't believe any of this anymore, but emotionally I still had a tie and a trigger that made me go back to that kind of reaction. I've gotten a lot better, but there's still some of it, like we're talking about the purpose thing. Sometimes I still do feel like I get intellectually the idea, or what I think now is that like what I do, my biggest responsibility is to myself and to like the people that I love. That's it. But sometimes I'm like, well, does it matter that what I do doesn't really have any significance outside of my life? I don't know, but
it's like never using your eyes, and then now you're just starting to learn to use your eyes, and it gets your vision gets better and clearer along the way.
And you get more used to doing things without it, but you use something I saw it as a crutch for a long time. It takes a while to get out of the habit of doing that. So whereas when I talk to somebody who never believed or never had a strong belief or a different way of looking at it, they're like, I'll talk to them, they're like, yeah, I always thought that we made our own purpose. Like, it was like no big deal, and they don't quite understand why it's that hard for me to do it, But
yeah, there's an analogy I like to use with that, because of course I had the same experience myself, although I was younger and I had thought these things through as well as an adult would have, but so I wasn't confronted with the same, same existential angst about it. But I liken it to growing up your whole life thinking that you're the love child of Bill Gates, that your mama was impregnated by Bill Gates, and you are going to come into $1 billion someday, right? And so you live accordingly, and you're not necessarily saving a lot of money. You're confident that you will be able to retire at a very early age, and I'm going to be able to live a Playboy lifestyle or whatever. Life's going to be great. It's all going to come out well for me, and I'll be able to take care of all my friends and the people I love. And Mom, I'll tell you, I'm going to pay you back for everything that you've done for me, and it's all going to be rosy. And then you find out when you turn 18 that you're not inheriting anything, because you are in fact not the love child of Bill Gates, and you're going to have to work your butt off just like everybody else. And now all of a sudden, work sucks. Work isn't something that you do just for a little bit of pocket cash. In the meantime, now this is drudgery, right? And then the people around you who've been working their whole lives and going about this and never operating under the misapprehension that they were going to come into $1 billion are looking at you like going, what are you so demoralized about, right? This is all born of false expectations, right? You're demoralized at an ordinary way of life because you've been in the grips of an absolute delusion. Everything that you believed was wrong, and all your expectations were predicated on a falsehood. And the expectations were out of this world. They were comically high. They're everything you would want and everything that you could wish for, which I think is what the promise of most religions is, right? That death is an illusion, or if it's not an illusion, an exception is going to be made in your case. Everything good that you could possibly want is going to be delivered to you forever. You're never going to experience a sad moment again. And everyone who's wicked will be punished, and everyone who's deserving of good things will get those good things. I mean, it is obviously a fantasy, but if you've been reared with that and sold that your whole life, then of course when it is taken away from you, either because you sort of reason your way out of it, or for emotive reasons you tumble out of your faith, or whatever the reason is, once that is evacuated from your life, now, oh man, life seems kind of dreary. It looks like it's in black and white, whereas it was in Technicolor before. So that's how I see it. Anyway.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. And then it comes to like when you're talking to other people. For me, when I talk to other people about it, then I do feel kind of naive that I just operated on this thought for a long time, But it was what it was. And so in some ways, I think, to answer the question, I think it is depressing and for a while, and I think it's like, I don't know that it's depressing in a bad way. Depressing is kind of bad, but I mean, it's not bad. It just, when you're adjusting, it's hard to do, and I think it's compounded by the fact that a lot of people, when they're going through this process of leaving religion, they lose other things, social connections, marriages, stuff like that, and that makes it even worse. So they have to deal with this alone because they've maybe lost relationships because of their leaving the religion. So
I've heard similar stories, and people laugh when I tell them about my deconversion story, because it wasn't me talking to someone in person. It was Yahoo Answers, honestly, of all things. And so someone challenged me to the point that I had to sit myself down and say, you know what, I really don't believe this. And then I started thinking back. I was allowing this to placate my mind. I was being placated into believing that the scenarios that I encountered that were tough and that I wanted justice for, some transgression, they weren't going to get they weren't going to get met with God's divine justice like I was being taught. And one of the things that I had to come to grips with is that shit's going to happen to them regardless, and all I'd been doing was attributing this external force to that, the American version of karma, essentially. And so I know I went through a pretty deep depression for about 2 weeks, and then after I came out of that, I'd realized that, this was the residual effects of being indoctrinated my entire life. And so it is something that is quite depressing for that time, but I came out with a renewed faith in myself that I'm going to do everything that I need to do in this lifetime. I'm not going to bullshit. I'm not going to trivialize this lifetime. I'm going to do what I can for myself and for others, especially my family, and not just hope that I'm going to see Grandpa Joe in the next lifetime. Sadly enough, I would dream of seeing my Grandpa Joe, who had a big impact on my life, in my dreams. And I no longer saw him after I became an atheist. But I found solace in the fact that I still have his memories.
Well, I think
a lot of evangelicals, are told, oh, you have to have a personal relationship with God. So when that's developed and you deconvert, okay, you just lost your best friend, so to speak. You can no longer have your permanent friend who will always be there with you. And Christians are often taught, all humans are sinners, all humans are fallible, all humans make mistakes, and the only one you can really count on is God. God's perfect. God will is all good, all loving. He's always there for you. You can always count on him. And then when you lose that, okay, you lost your best friend, and you just lost your perfection. You lost your hope for perfection, for everything to be right. So you're just left with the rest of us measly human beings.
And you're shoved into like a harsh reality of where beforehand you could give it to God or give your problems to someone else to worry about and get the answers for, and now you're having to contemplate and work through these things completely yourself or through a counselor or with friends, and you don't have this entity or concept that you can just give the problem to.
Yeah, but also it teaches us that we have to work together now, because there is no God, because we can't count on a God to make everything right. We have to make the human effort and the human cooperation to make things better, because no one else is going to do it for us.
Right.
It's really up to us.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I was going to say from what Drag was saying, I think that it sounds like his experience is pretty similar to kind of mine. It was kind of like I got to a point, and then it was like, okay, maybe I better actually look at this, and then things kind of unraveled pretty quickly for me. But I think for me, one of the good things, there's the depressing part. One of the good things is that for the first time in my life, I'm actually there's a level of self-confidence that I didn't have before when I was a Christian, because you are taught that you basically, you're given these underlying messages that you can't trust yourself, you can't trust your intellect or your heart or whatever, and you're also taught that in the end you just rely on God and He'll fix everything for you. But now if you don't have that idea anymore, that you feel like at the end I am responsible for myself and I'm the one that's going to have to make this work, use help with people around me, then you get to a point where you have to rely on yourself, and then you start to become more confident. But in the end, if you can't ever really feel like it was you that fixed your problem, you have to give it back to God, it doesn't, for me, that didn't give me very much self-confidence as I was dealing with life. So it has helped in that way.
Well,
So
Deidre,
can we
I want
let
to
Deidre
pass this
talk
off
now?
to. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to pass this off to Deidre here for a second, and then I have another question here.
I think I tried to hit on this earlier, which there are some Christians, and I will fully grant you that there are some Christians that care more about the next life than this life. And then there's even a quote to Kill a Mockingbird about that, that there's some people that care so much about the next life that they are horrible in this life. I will totally give you that. However, I don't think that's very good theology. I think that's bad theology. And the reason why I think that's bad theology is a lot of reasons. A lot of it is due to consequences and things like that. And I think it would be a poor model of Christ if we didn't care about people in this life. So this idea that God is a crutch, right? The 1,000-foot crutch. I'll admit to it. I find God to be a crutch. I'm not going to lie. I'm a Kierkegaardian in that way. I think that faith is a little bit beyond reason. I think that God is. Yeah, I will admit that God is a crutch in some ways. Absolutely. But I have more to say about that. But I would say that doesn't mean that he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me he's my best friend. I don't look at it like that. I don't believe in a God that helps me find parking spaces. Should I get a Big Mac or a Whopper and then lets children die in the sea? I don't post #blessed on Facebook. It makes me ill. What I do care about is I do think that God calls us to love human beings. I'm a Christian humanist. I believe in Matthew 25, where Jesus says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was a stranger and you let me in. I was hungry and you fed me. I believe in that Jesus. And that is my goal. And so some of us, yeah, you're right. Some of us don't care and we're apathetic. Other people are really involved in charity. Look up the numbers in Christian charity. It's huge. It's not all about proselytization. Oh my gosh, I can't say the word. Help.
Proselytization.
Thank you. Stumble.
Jesus-ing.
But some people are actually trying to give you something you can eat, something that you can hold on to, loving people in a practical way. Now, and then on the other hand, you have the Gideons that say, oh, you had an earthquake, here's a bunch of Bibles, have a nice day. So, I will say that there's a balance between the two actions, but I do think that Christ models loving people in a practical way, and caring about the here and now. And so that's how I view it. I care about the here and now. I find purpose in life because I'm created in God's image and he calls me to that purpose. And Jesus is interesting to me because I can see him. I can kind of understand Jesus a little bit, and so I can emulate that. However, I don't put God in a box. I don't think it's cheap where he's my best friend and I have him on a hotline and he walks with me and he talks with me and tells me he's my friend, which is my most hated American hymn ever.
You mean you don't like the Footprints in the Sand poem?
That one's kind of goofy too.
Ozzy, you wanted to touch on something there, and I think actually Deidre did a pretty good job of segueing kind of to my next point here. But go ahead first.
Oh, okay. Well, initially I was going to say something about crutches, but we've sort of moved on from that, and something more relevant for Deidre. And this is by no way meant to sort of encourage you to stray from Christianity or anything like that. But everything that you just described about Christian humanism, it seems to me that can be justified even if you're an atheist. Right? It seems to me that you don't need Jesus as a role model and an inspiration, and you don't have to posit anything metaphysically extravagant like a God and heaven and hell and eternal souls or anything like that, and atonement and salvation or anything of the sort. To see the value in the serious part of the Christian moral message that you described. It seems to me that all of that can be properly motivated without any of that sort of metaphysical architecture.
In yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, so do you think that it's impossible or unlikely or too hard to motivate oneself to do these kinds of things, these kinds of acts, and be that kind of person without Christianity? And I will grant that Christianity does supply one with extra reasons for doing it, which is why I think you will find that Christians, in fact, do donate, especially evangelicals, actually donate far more to charities than the contrast class of non-evangelicals. So, I mean, Christians really do a lot of charity work. They donate an awful lot of money. This kind of work that you're talking about, I think, does enjoy an additional motivation from Christianity. But do you think that that the Christian message or positing a God or something like that is necessary to do that, or do you think it can be done independently without it? Because I think it can, obviously.
Well, clearly we see organizations like Doctors Without Borders, which is secular, right? So whether you're an atheist or a Christian or whatever, I believe that you can join that. It's not about proselytization. It's about helping people, and I think that's a great thing. I think that's a good thing. And I've met many atheists who are very kind-hearted and generous and like to be good to people and care about the suffering of other people, and that I will absolutely give atheists kudos that are like that, because there is no gold star, there's no crown in heaven, there's no mansion in heaven. I'll give you kudos for caring about your fellow man with nothing more selfish than maybe you could feel good about yourself or something, or you could leave a legacy or something like that. That might be the selfish side, quote unquote, if I could dare say that. We all have a selfish side, but that there's altruism there, absolutely, and I could give you a high five on that. But at the same time, I guess I kind of look at it as religion pulls you back when you don't feel it anymore. Religion is supposed to tug at your heart when your heart grows cold. God is supposed to, the Holy Spirit is supposed to convict you when you're callous and cold.
Well, one of the things that you said there was that the only reason why an atheist might do something like that, like the only selfish reason, would be just to feel good. And
the selfish reason, like if the selfish side, I said there's altruism, and then if I would say there's a selfish side, it might be feel good, which Christians can do that too.
Right. I mean, it's the I think when it comes to, if you're just to do a direct comparison between atheism and somebody who's religious in that sense, that the need to do something good from the religious standpoint seems to be for reward. It's because, hey, if I do good things will happen. This reciprocity type, idea that you're going to get repaid, how many fold in heaven or whatever. Well, on the atheistic worldview, or the atheistic side, there is nothing that you're expecting back. That you do it for feeling good about yourself is, I don't think the reason anybody does that stuff. They do that stuff because, if you're a non-believer, because it's just the right thing to do, or they feel it's the right thing to do. I don't think it's about any type of gratification at all. But I mean, that's a different point, I guess.
It depends on the person.
I'd like to come in when I can.
Oh, go ahead. I'll go after Helena, please.
So you were talking about one of the things, you mentioned a number of things, but one of the things that you thought was going to be very difficult for you to understand was this idea of purpose. But you just said you have your purpose because you were made in the image of God. And I was hoping that you could expound on that, because that to me is completely baffling. I don't understand how being made in the image of God gives you purpose. And if it does give you purpose, it's certainly not as good of a purpose as some other purpose that would come from you. That's the way it seems to me anyway. So what do you mean, I was made in the image of God, that's the purpose? And how does that make you more, how does that comfort you more than any way that you could imagine we find our purpose?
That's a good question. So being made in the image of God, some biblical literalists are really hooked on this for creationism, and I'm a theistic evolutionist. So I think of it in a metaphysical sense, right? So made in the image of God for me means to have some qualities of God, some goodness that God has, because God's nature is good in us. And that he's given us the capacity, he's given all men the capacity to be good. And so in my mind, being made in the image of God is kind of like this. Our purpose and this is standard Christian theology, and I know it's offensive to anti-theists and atheists, so I understand that my theism is offensive, but standard Christian theology, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, will all agree that our purpose is to glorify God. So I know, and so I look at it this way. I look at us as mirrors, and that it is our purpose to mirror the good attributes, the goodness of God, and I find purpose in that.
I think, Helena, you look like you wanted to respond to that.
Well, I don't understand how suddenly, because it's Christianity, a being can seek glory, and that's not a character flaw. To me, the seeking of self-glorification is a character flaw. And just because it's God doing it, how does that make it? How is that suddenly a beautiful thing?
Does God need to be humble?
How does that imbue purpose in a person's life? That's what.
And that's the second part. Yeah, but it's just, that's one of my pet peeves when people explain, oh, it's because it glorifies God. Well, but I'm more interested, I suppose, or at least with you. How does that imbue purpose? That you're glorifying God.
Can I answer from what it would have been from my perspective, or do you just want to hear what Deidre says?
Both would be great, actually. B, if you want to go first and just give Deidre a chance to think about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I can understand that. Again, for me, it may come back to just like that was what it was. It's like if you're told your purpose is you were created in the image of God and your purpose is to glorify Him, that was it. And so then when I looked at other people and they said, well, I got my purpose by helping others or by whatever, it was like, well, and then you're told like, but those people are deceived, blah, blah, blah. So for me, that was how I don't know that it had like a logical reason that I could have, because for me, when I was given all these reasons and stuff, I was at an age that didn't have a lot of abstract thinking, critical thinking kind of thing. So I just accepted them. And then eventually when I was an adult, it was kind of embedded into all of the culture and the language and the stuff that you're used to using. And it did come back to now when I look at it, I'm like, okay, I guess that didn't make a lot of sense, but I understand coming from that viewpoint. For me, it was. So I don't know how I would like intellectually come back and say, oh, this is why, and it makes total sense here, but then it didn't really ever make, it was more of a thing that I was taught. For me, it was. So.
Okay, but you don't believe that anymore, but Deidre still does.
No.
So Deidre, could you explain that? Could you explain your reasoning there?
Okay, so like Kierkegaard says, God has given us a marching order. Our purpose here on earth is to find the orders and carry them out. Those orders acknowledge our special gifts. That we believe that God has not only made us in His image, but that He bestows upon us special gifts, unique gifts, and that we're supposed to find those gifts and use them to glorify God. If you look at the movie Chariots of Fire, and there's the Eric Liddell, and he says that he feels God's pleasure when he runs. And that's how I view it. I don't know how else to word it better than that. That I feel God's pleasure when I go, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm meant to do.
How is God's pleasure something that imbues your life with value? Supposing God found pleasure in your agony, right? Supposing you were in the hands of a sadistic being. Supposing that the creator of the universe and all of reality around us was just a vicious sadist whose pleasure derived from our misery, right? Complete immiseration. And the more we suffered and the more we hurt one another, the more callous we were to one another, the greater his pleasure. Would his purpose for you become your purpose? As I see it, one person's purposes are not transitive upon another person. They're not communicative that way. You can't communicate a purpose. A purpose is like a value. Something is of value to me because I value it. Something is of significance to me because something is of significance because it's of significance to me, to an agent. And I think God can have purposes for us if He exists. He can purpose things for us. But like Frankenstein, who creates his man, his monster, what Frankenstein wants for his autonomous creature is not something that his autonomous creature is beholden to. And I just don't see how a being, no matter how magnificent you imagine it, that its purposes are our purposes because it has purposes for us. I mean, there might be other reasons why I would want to abide by those purposes, but it can't be that those are what he purposed for me. That seems to me nonsensical. So, I mean, now you could say, well, he purposes things for me, and they are good things, and I want to be a good being, and therefore it so happens that his purposes and my purposes coincide in that I happen to value them for moral reasons, and so I'm going to do them anyway. Even if they weren't his purposes, I'd still do them. But that's merely to say that his purposes, that his purposes and my purposes happen to coincide, but they are not my purposes because they are his purposes. So as I see it, what God purposes for us is completely irrelevant to whether or not our life has purpose. Right? His purposes don't have to be our purposes, no matter what they are. And you just have to imagine a different kind of God to see that. Right?
Then there comes a time, though, when there's certain things within the Christian faith that would not necessarily fit with what someone would choose for themselves. And then they have to say, and then a lot of times you're kind of faced with this decision of, do I go with what I feel like I want to do or what I feel like should be done in the situation, or do I default to, because I believe that God knows better than me and he has better idea of understanding, that do you go with what God thinks? And I think
that's a serious problem that I think is could be at the heart of some Christians who have a hard time believing what could it possibly be like to be an atheist. Especially you've got these existentialist types where they want to live authentically, and authenticity is critically important. But some core part of them, they're not allowed to express, and they feel shame and pain, and because of their religion. I could see how someone like that, who is spending a large part of their life denying a piece of themselves, when coincidentally they are the type where living authentically is one of the most important things to them, something to think about all the time. There are those kinds of people. Why they would be like, well, God, my life is, if I were an atheist, it's too difficult to imagine. Because if there is no God, what are they doing? What are they doing with their life? And maybe their true purpose was exactly about that thing. So I could see how it would be unconscionable for a person like that to even entertain the possibility.
I think that it is, and in a large part, for a lot of people, it was for me, that then there's a part of, that you do have to deny a large part of yourself in order to stay within the faith, because as you get older and you realize certain things about yourself, it's like, well, if I don't fit what I'm supposed to be doing here, but I still have to hold to this idea, you do have to deny a large part of yourself sometimes to be able to maintain a faith.
What if there is no God and the part that you're denying was really your purpose?
Well,
exactly.
Let me
That's
ask,
what you should make use of this life for.
Let me ask,
helping children, things like that. Go ahead, I'll shut up.
It's all right. Let me ask Deidre a question on that one. Is if obviously if it's not too personal or anything, I don't want to go into too much details. But how often do you find yourself in a position where something you will isn't lining up with God's will, and how do you even establish if something is God's will?
So here comes the woo. we believe in the Holy Spirit, and that the Holy Spirit convicts. We believe in prayer. We believe in meditation of the scriptures. So if things are not aligning with God's word, which we try to hide in our heart so that we don't offend him, that's a biblical quote there. If the Holy Spirit is convicting us, even though we want something or desire something, Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Now, I don't think our works, or I don't look at my faith as a list of what not to do. I think that's target fixation. If I stare at everything that I cannot do, oh my goodness, I don't lie, I don't cheat, I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't hang with those that do, and become one of those pious Christians, I will pretty much target fixate. I find I do. Like if I'm focused on, oh my gosh, can't sin constantly, I'm going to sin. If I focus on what's noble and pure and true, if I focus on what's good, if I focus on what to aim for, I'm more likely to be in a better trajectory. And so I don't know. I think I lost your point a little bit, and so
That's okay. Benny actually had a point that he wanted to bring up here. I'm gonna move it to him, and then I think Xbox has a question after that.
Yeah, I do. Are we still on air? The thing is not showing.
Yeah,
but-
it runs through
Okay.
XSplit, so it doesn't show on air in these hangouts.
Well, it was something that was said earlier ago, but I think it's worth mentioning. Deidre talked about how the Holy Spirit is supposed to pull you back from maybe, like, I guess you could say, crisis points where you might otherwise do something that you'd regret. And I think that something where we have an advantage, non-religious people have an advantage, is that when you look at people the way I do, which is I see people as they're a result of their biology and their experiences, right? I mean, it's nurture and nature, and there's no sort of mystical soul or spirit. There's no magical element there, right? They are what they are, who they are, is explainable by their circumstances, which is in their genes combined with the life they've lived, the people they've met, and the way those people have rubbed off on them. So when people end up a certain way, whether that be positive or negative, I don't necessarily give them credit or blame. This is just the life they've lived. I mean, and it made them what they are. So I don't feel the need for cosmic justice because I don't think that they've ultimately earned anything, really. I mean, I'd like to take credit. I don't really believe in free will in any kind of meaningful sense. I'd like to take credit for all of my wonderful accomplishments, and I'd love to, whatever, blame the people I don't like for being nasty. But it's just not how I see things. And I don't think religious people share that because they believe they have the freedom of choice, right? And so the soul or spirit can be blamed for what it's done and then rewarded or punished accordingly. So that's all.
Yeah, I see. I see justice as this social construct, right? Like it's a construct made by a social species. So I don't see it being this ultimate justice thing that religious people talk about, and fairness and things. I think that fairness is another construct from societies and minds and people. And just on a sidetrack that I don't want to go down, but I've come to see Christianity especially as this death cult that for some reason stops itself from being the death cult, from one man taking it upon itself to decide, okay, I'm going to go to hell, or I'm going to repent and hopefully go to heaven, and I'm just going to save everybody and wipe out all my clergy. And then I've made it where every one of them are going to go to heaven for sure. I may not go. I might be making the ultimate sacrifice, but I'm not sure what actually stops that. That was just on a side note, but the cosmic justice thing and the fairness thing, I'm still having a hard time understanding how beyond humans that this would play a role in anything.
I think if you have a God that can right wrongs, so if like someone murdered someone, for example, that God can bring that person back to life. That if someone killed one of your loved ones, well, what do you want more than anything? Well, you might not necessarily want to see that person punished, but more importantly, you want your loved one back.
But that's to your revenge or avenge thoughts. These are God's decisions. Everything's to God's will. So if someone comes and rapes and murders you, I mean, this supposedly was God's will to happen that way for a reason, for some teaching reason, or for some other reason. So
yeah, I mean, in that respect, yeah, you can think of the Calvinist God. Whatever comes to pass is God's will. He predetermined it since the beginning,
right.
And no matter what happens, it's all for His glory. So we're this is just a big TV show that He's watching. and no
Right.
matter what happens, it's he's enjoying it.
You've lost any sense of cosmic justice with that type of God.
Well,
Right. So it comes down to whether you care.
You just have personal vendettas at that point.
It's also problematic because it's more than a TV show. It's a rerun.
Right.
I mean, it's fixed. What's even bothering watching it?
Yeah, there's not much suspense for him at all, is there?
Well, there's nothing there. It's just a rerun. It's set in stone.
Yeah.
I don't even, it gets really complicated and bizarre. Also, he's omnipresent, so he's watching them have sex, and all the time he's watching.
Yep, and he called it good.
There you go.
Well, I think let me try to put it this way, and I really like the analogy that Ozzy put out earlier when he was talking about the person promised $1 billion, or they inherit $1 billion, and then to find out that you don't have it. It's a great example because and if I'll go into it a little bit more, I guess here, because I've been an atheist my entire life. There's been no point in my life where I was ever raised in any type of Christian home, even modern Christian home or anything. I've just been straight up non-believer. It's just something that's never really been an issue for me, except recently when I started doing this G plus stuff. But one of the things that happens, and one of the reasons why when you talk to some theists that say that atheism is a very depressing thought, is the fact that there's these constant promises and it's not just the promises of all these great things that come, but there's another aspect of that where they talk about how terrible the current world is, and that I don't see the world as this terrible place. I don't see this place as this meaningless, void existence. But this seems to be like one of the pathways, or one of the things that a lot of religious people are taught. One of the things that I always, really bothers me when talking with certain theists out there is this idea of, we're a fallen people. It's a fallen world. Everything is corrupt. Everything is terrible. That you can't be earthly. You can't be of this world. You can't embrace anything here. It's always got to be for, God, for something else. And the way they build up this entire idea that, there's this great ultimate concept, this great ultimate reward of heaven and cosmic justice, all this other stuff, is by completely destroying and tearing down this mortal realm, where you have to live your life. And because they tear this this place down, and they make you hate being who you are. They make you hate the world you live in, because of this promise of something coming afterwards. And that leads to, when you lose your faith, how do you shake that habit? How do you shake this idea that the world is not this terrible place, that sure, there's no divine purpose to everything, but that doesn't mean that you're living in some cesspool of humanity.
I put down the side there. I'm still stuck on why people think that we're owed any kind of fairness or cosmic justice on a heavenly level or on a societal level. I mean, yes, it makes society work better, but I don't know why it would be owed to us on either sense. That's just beyond me. That's where I'm stuck.
Well, even in Christianity, you're not owed it. It's by His grace. It's a gift, right? So I mean, it's at His leisure that He decides to give you this gift of eternal life. As an example. So there's no obligation for God to do anything for us, right?
Yeah, the definition of grace, pretty standard definition, is getting something that you don't deserve. And mercy, we always sometimes conflate mercy and grace is not getting what you deserve. So yeah, Christians believe that we get a gift that we don't deserve. So we do get love and justice and mercy and good things that sometimes we haven't necessarily earned. And then some of it in life we do earn, I think.
But these fairnesses are only based on what we think, what we care about. I mean, do you think that God really thinks about fairness and justice and things of these sorts?
I think God does care about fairness and justice. However, I cannot say, because I don't have his perspective, I cannot say that my understanding of fairness and justice always perfectly aligns with his. I am constantly, so while I do think that God does have standards of fairness and justice and goodness and all that stuff, I'm not always certain that what I think is fair and just and kind and good, I'm not always certain that my viewpoint always aligns with God. But that's part of the faith journey. Dare I say that word? Ding, ding, ding. Helena was just talking about that word journey, that faith journey that we do believe in, that we're looking for a way to align ourselves with God's will. When Jesus prays, he says he models prayer for us. It's not, people like to make fun that God is praying to himself. I think Jesus is doing that for our benefit, and he's modeling, not my will be done, but your will be done. And Kierkegaard says that prayer changes the nature of one who prays. It doesn't change God's mind, it changes the nature of one who prays. And so I don't look at God as this cosmic vending machine or somebody that has my special interests, always, in mind. God, please help me find a parking spot. Oh, Facebook hashtag blessed. I got whipped cream on my mocha. I don't know. It's just, it's one of those things where I think it's about trying to align yourself with the will of God, and that is a journey and a process, and it's sort of, I guess, to address Helena, it is a little bit of a loss of self and individuality, just a little bit, but I don't necessarily think sacrifice is always a bad thing.
Well, I'm going to jump in here for a second, just for anybody that's watching here, that we're going to be moving just kind of to closing remarks here shortly. We only got about 20 minutes left in our regular kind of scheduled time that we do here. If anybody's watching has any questions for the panel or any comments or anything they want to put out there, let me know. I'll ask them to the panel here. I'll pay attention to that stuff. And in the meantime, we're going to probably just try to wind things down here just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just trying to align myself with someone else's will completely undermines my will and who I am. The will that was imposed upon me as a child was that I was supposed to become a preacher. And being a scientist and a preacher are two very distinct fields. Being a preacher would undermine my naturally inquisitive mind, because I'd be accepting religious dogma instead of researching claims that could be debunked upon, finding evidence to go in a different direction or what have you. So when I hear about Christians sacrificing certain things about themselves, I understand that, but it doesn't mean that all sacrifice is equal. I could always sacrifice something about myself and my family. I've sacrificed my health. I no longer have full use of my knees or my left arm for my family. Was that sacrifice a good one? Well, if you ask my wife, she might say no. If you ask my son, he might say yes. If you ask me, I'll tell you I don't know. I don't think that all sacrifice is good. Saying that something is a sacrifice doesn't mean that it's inherently a good thing. You can needlessly sacrifice something. So I think we'd have to actually take a look at what's being sacrificed and what can come of that sacrifice.
Well, I think maybe to kind of close us off here is we'll just kind of go through the people left in the room. Unfortunately, because of the later start time, some people had to take off early. But just ask the question directly. Is atheism depressing? Or what are your thoughts just on that in general? So I guess I can start with Ozzy. You want to go first tonight?
Sure. Well, I mean, atheism isn't a worldview. It's not an entire philosophical outlook. It is a particular philosophical position on a particular philosophical question. Does a God exist? And the atheist answers no. That doesn't imply moral nihilism or moral relativism. It doesn't imply that life is without meaning or significance or purpose or value. One has to believe a whole bunch of other things, have a whole raft of other philosophical commitments to come away thinking that life is evacuated of meaning, and that there are no durable moral principles that one should aspire to, for instance. So I don't think that atheism is in and of itself depressing. However, I would be the first person to admit that a lot of people who sort of hold these other views, who are philosophical materialists, for instance, who think that there are no moral facts, that morality is merely individual preferences imposed upon other people, right? People who take these views very often do have a depressing outlook. And so I think there probably is some correlation between being depressed or having a depressive or despondent outlook on life, a devalorization of life, devaluation of life. If you're an atheist, I think there is a correlation there, but there doesn't need to be. And it's not because they're atheists; it's because of these other things. So I have a feeling that if one holds to certain other philosophical commitments, there's a good chance that one's going to be an atheist, and then consequently, by a kind of correlation, accidental correlation, you're going to find that atheists have a tendency to have a bleaker, starker picture of life that sometimes doesn't animate them in the same way that certain rosier and I think unrealistic outlooks on life will have on a person. So I think that much is true. But I don't think there's anything. I mean, I'm lucky. I have a life filled with joy and meaning and value and purpose and significance, and I'm a moral realist. And I just don't think that atheism evacuates any of that from my life in the least degree. But I do think I am rid of a lot of illusions and false hopes that would have had me enjoying life for the wrong reasons. So that's how I see it.
All right. Thanks, Oz. Helena, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Same question. Closing
Well,
remarks.
of course it doesn't.
Okay.
I don't think it causes a depressing outlook at all. I can understand, though, that thinking you're not going to live forever could be depressing. But for me, it does the opposite. It's sort of like, this is our one chance. You got to pick something. You have to take action now, and look at the results around you, because the results of what you do are only happening now. So for me, it's invigorating and not depressing.
All right. Drake.
Damn it, I wasn't finished typing it. I had a little spiel too I was going to type up. Okay, that's all right. I'll just say it from memory. Basically, for me, atheism isn't even something that makes up my worldview. It is a part of me, of course. It's one question, or one answer to a question that plays little to no role in my life. To me, fishing is a religion. That takes up a good chunk of my time, and that drives me to do many different things and conduct myself in a particular manner. Not believing in God, that does not at all. But from that, being an atheist does allow me to accept myself for who I am, and I can say that is one of the benefits of being an atheist. I no longer have to hate myself for my faults. I can accept them and I can work on them. I don't believe anymore that there is this being who's watching me and judging me every second of every day for every thought and every transgression that I had supposedly done. I can open myself up, accept these faults, and then go about trying to fix them under my own volition, knowing full well that there's probably nothing else after I pass. So, noting that, I will make the most of what I know to exist in the here and in the now. All right, I'm done.
All right, Benny. Good to see you back, by the way, Benny. I know you're probably busy over the summer there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I think to your question, it can be difficult, and it was difficult for me at first when I was transitioning away from being a Christian many years ago, around my mid-20s. And it is depressing because, well, one thing that I remember thinking about and enjoying was that God sees me and knows me. There's this someone out there that's the most powerful, amazing thing, and it knows me intimately. And yes, that makes you very vulnerable, but it also, as part of the theology, you're taught that you're also accepted by this majestic creature, and that you'll be forgiven for the things that you do. So I mean, it offers something that does have sort of emotional resonance. It has value to the believer. But and then when you lose that, you, like Helena was just saying, you have to come to grips with the fact that life is finite. You know, that we're bounded in time, that we don't go on forever. You know, that we're actually very restricted, and that even our species, I mean, I've said this before, but it was recently, there was another thing that just came out about, you know, the coming heat death of the universe, and how, you know, it's trillions of years away or whatever, but this all does run its course. At some point, it all will be over. And is that okay? I mean, it doesn't really matter if we think it's okay, because it is what it is, regardless of whether we think it's okay or not. But I think what it does that's good for me is it does create this sense of immediacy, this sense of the need to make the most of the now, that it's not the hereafter. I mean, when I have conversations with Christians, some of them in my family, you know, what I hear is that it's not this life that really counts, it's the next. It's we're storing up riches in heaven. I mean, I don't remember the verses to quote them, but there are verses throughout the Bible that it's not this life that really matters. This life is like a vapor. It says in Ephesians, I think. You know, life is like a vapor. That's Old Testament. Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Probably Ecclesiastes.
I think that's probably right. Those E words, you know. But so, you know, you're taught that to not really invest too much in this earth. This earth is already, it's a foregone conclusion that this earth is going to perish. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So when Christians see things going really poorly, when they see the glaciers melting and all the other bad stuff happening, Christians many times act like, well, yeah, of course that's what's going to happen. It's all predicted that everything's going to go downhill. They don't have the same kind of motivation to try to change things, because many of them don't even believe that they can be changed. And I think that's really horrible. So I think I've said about enough, but I think that being I don't think that it's being an atheist, but I think that it's not relying on God to do everything for us, not relying on this powerful super being to clean up all our messes, you know, because that's not going to happen. If things are going to be fixed, we're going to need to do it ourselves, and that's the more adult way for us to treat this planet and our existence, is to take responsibility for ourselves. So thank you, Saka.
All right, Xbox.
Oh, he's muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think once you realize reality is the way it is, whether it's real or not, but once you live in kind of reality and stop trying to bring up mystical things to explain things, it is kind of harsh. And maybe that's depressing to some people. But it is what it is. And I do think it's a philosophical position, like Ozzy was saying. It's a response. Atheism, at least, it is a response to a theistic philosophical position as well. And I don't find depression, and I didn't go through a depressive state going from Christian to atheist at all. I actually found more enjoyment in life, and found more beauty in things, and more curiosity and an excitement in things. So I'm on the side that I know it can be for some people that are really deep in religion and lose it, but I'm on the other side of the spectrum. So, and I would like to add, I'm not gonna have to hang today. Maybe not the next show either. I'm sure most people have seen my messages or my post. I'm almost there. I'm almost where things will get back to normal. So, and I appreciate all the support.
What I
So.
might do is I'm going to, once I take this off air, I'm going to make the link public. Anybody that wants to come in and talk off air is more than welcome to. I'm going to let Deidre go last tonight
Thank you, Deidre.
because she's been a great sport for coming out and talking with us. As for myself, I think I just echo Benny's sentiments. There is that I think that one of the faults of certain religions out there, well, especially the Christian mindset, especially the Calvinist mindset, is that, like I said before, this notion of this fallen, corrupted world, and we're terrible people that are unworthy of eternal life, that of good things, that stuff can only come through God's graces or whatever. But the notion that I think the strength that the worldview that doesn't believe in a God has, is the fact that if you want that world to get better, we need to take control. We need to change it. And when you're dealing with a group of people that think that there's no point in changing the world, that this is just the way it is, whatever, I find that a lot more depressing than the notion of there not being anything. But on that note, Deidre, you have last words, and go. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, I would say that there's almost a Christian grim view that exists, which is that we are scumbags, that we are just all depraved. It's not just that depravity is something that sort of, like I said, we're a mirror that reflects God, but the depravity is something that just we are intrinsically just evil and bad. And I think more like depravity as something like we've got tarnish on our mirror, something that obscures the view of God. And so instead of that we're intrinsically bad and evil, that we have things that we could shut off and change. And so I'm a big fan of Philippians, where it says, focus on whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever is admirable, whatever is excellent and praiseworthy, and think about those things, because those are the things that will help you kind of set a trajectory. I cannot speak today. Trajectory of your life. Those are the things that kind of set a mode of thinking that could be positive in many ways. And James chapter 2, it says faith without works is dead, and it's that famous passage where Martin Luther almost wanted to throw Jimmy in the fire. This famous quote that oh my gosh, this is kind of going against this free grace thing. But I think what James is getting at is if your brother and sister is naked and lacks daily food, and you say to them, go in peace, keep warm, wish you well, I'm praying for you, as a late atheist like to dig on that, praying just makes you feel better. If your faith is like that and praying just makes you feel better, and you can just say, and you do nothing to help somebody, then James directly confronts you and says, faith without works is dead. If you don't have faith in action, that's a problem. So that there is actual practical application in Christianity, and so I just want to point that out, that if a Christian just goes, this life doesn't matter, and they're worried about the next life, that they live this life poorly, I would say that God probably will hold us accountable to that. And so I would urge all Christians to say, hey, instead of worrying about a checklist of do's and don'ts and being a Pharisee and a Sadducee, let's look at what we can do and what we can aim for and what we can help to change in this world, and that we can do something. Because apathy causes death. And as we see with Lycerians, which just is awful, that apathy causes death. And so I will agree that a lot of atheists have morality, a lot of atheists do a lot of good things without that gold star or hope of heaven. And I'll definitely applaud you on that and high five you and say, yes, I agree that atheists can have morality. But where we differ is that I believe that there's a source for it, and that he gives us a capacity for it. And so I do find meaning there. And maybe it's an emotional argument. I can't deny it, but it's true to me.
All right. So again, everybody, thanks for tuning in and watching. Thanks to everybody that was on the panel tonight. Benny, Dragnaut, Helena, Ozzy, Daedra, Xbox, as well as Floyd and Befuddled, who had to take off early. Like I said, I'm going to be making the link public in a couple minutes here, so feel free to jump in. I'm sure there'll be some space here. If you haven't already subscribed to Daedra the Holy Spackles channel, you should. She's done 3 interviews in the last few weeks with it was Veckel, Befuddled, and what was the first one? Christian Anarchist. I think so. I think that's what it was. But anyway,
Yeah.
they were
Christian Anarchist, Befuddled, and Beckel.
yeah, they were actually really good discussions. I really enjoyed watching all those. So, subscribe to the channel, check those out. Those are really good. Ozzy has a new video coming out soon that he's going to be mirroring from an earlier hangout, I believe, called The Godless Meaning of Life, which kind of goes along with some of the things we're talking about tonight. So check that out as well. And again, thanks to everybody for watching. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.